The night was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you question whether it's really empty. A faint buzzing broke through the stillness, a sound so ordinary it almost didn't register, until it became a pattern. The phone in the corner of the living room lit up on its own, digits dialing into the darkness without a hand to guide it. At first, it seemed like a glitch, a trick of technology. But when the local 911 operator answered, there was only silence on the other end, a pause so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Imagine standing in your own living room, the shadows of familiar furniture stretching like strangers, and realizing that something or someone inside your walls is trying to call for help. This is Ohio, a place where quiet streets and neat lawns hide stories no one wants to hear. The house in question seemed ordinary from the outside. Peeling paint, a crooked mailbox, an unassuming front door. But the moment you step inside, it's different. There's a weight in the air, a chill that makes the hair on your arms rise, the kind of cold that doesn't come from the weather. The family who first moved in noticed the small things at first, the way doors would creak long after being shut, the faint hum of a phone line carrying no voice but seeming to whisper anyway. Neighbors told them stories of strange noises, shadows moving in the windows when the lights were off. Yet no one could explain why the house seemed restless, alive in ways that defied logic. Then came the first call. The phone rang without reason, and when the 911 operator answered, the only thing on the line was silence. Then a click, as if someone had hung up, leaving behind a tension that was almost tangible. It wasn't the sort of incident you could dismiss. It was as though the house itself had reached out, desperate for attention, for help. And the thought that it might have its own will was terrifying. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow sliding across the walls became a potential message, a signal from something trapped or watching, and with every passing night, the house grew bolder. Lights would flicker at specific times, objects shifted without explanation, and the calls continued, always at the same hour, like a heartbeat you couldn't ignore. As the family tried to rationalize the events, a creeping unease settled in, the type that made you check the locks twice, even when you knew they were secure. This wasn't just a house. It was an entity, aware of its occupants and intent on making its presence known. And the scariest part, no one could explain why or what it wanted. It was a story that began quietly, with a phone dialing on its own, and it would only grow stranger from there, pulling everyone involved into a web of fear that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. You're about to step into that house, to feel the walls breathe around you, and to witness the events that turned a simple Ohio home into one of the most unsettling mysteries imaginable. The question is, once you enter, will you ever be able to leave? The phone rang again, but this time nobody was there to answer it. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind where Ohio neighborhoods are drowned in the calm hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. The family had just settled in after dinner, the low flicker of television light reflecting against the walls of the living room. Everything seemed mundane, perfectly ordinary. That is, until the phone began its first inexplicable call. The handset lifted itself from the cradle, fingers unseen pulling the cord taut as digits spun into the unknown. The mother of the house noticed first, thinking it a prank by one of the children. A trick of their imagination, perhaps. But when the phone connected, the line was empty. Then a click, as though someone on the other end had vanished mid-breath. The father rushed in, shrugging off the initial chill crawling up his spine, blaming a technical glitch, a wiring fault, something rational. He unplugged the line only to watch the phone lift itself again, cradle vibrating, numbers dialing automatically. The children huddled in a corner, the youngest whispering that he'd seen shadows move along the walls, long, thin shapes that didn't match the furniture or the angles of the room. Their eyes darted around nervously, catching movement in corners that shouldn't have had corners at all. Panic was subtle at first, but it grew, coiling around their hearts like smoke. By the time the first responders arrived, summoned by the disconnected 911 call, the family was pale, trembling. The officers entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the dim light. The house was silent, eerily so, but every creak of floorboards seemed amplified. Every gust of wind brushing against the windows like fingers rapping on the glass. Nothing was out of place, no intruder, no sign of forced entry, but the static-filled phone line hummed like a heartbeat, each ring echoing through the walls. They tried to trace the call, finding nothing. The house had dialed for help on its own. The family's disbelief mixed with terror. They began to suspect the impossible, the presence of something more than wires and circuits. That night, as the family huddled together in the living room, the phone rang again. This time, a whisper, almost inaudible, drifted from the line. "Help. Me." The youngest child's eyes widened in horror. The adults froze, staring at the cradle as the sound repeated, fractured, and broken, as if being distorted through the very walls themselves. Something was in the house, something that wanted to be noticed. And from that moment on, normal life was gone. Every tick of the clock became louder, every shadow suspicious. The first incident was not just a call, it was a warning, the first tremor in a growing storm that would shake their reality to its core. It wasn't just the phone anymore, the house was alive. What followed was not a series of isolated incidents, it was a crescendo of unease that built night after night. Lights began flickering at odd intervals, pulsing in sync with the phone's own inexplicable activity. At first it seemed coincidental, the kind of thing an overworked mind might ignore, but the pattern was unmistakable. Every night, at precisely 2:17 a.m., the phone would ring, the lights would dim, and the faint hum of static would fill the air. The children refused to sleep in their rooms, and the parents found themselves drifting from room to room, unable to settle anywhere for long. Objects shifted as if moved by unseen hands. Cups left on counters tipped over without cause, doors would slowly close on their own, and sometimes a faint scratching echoed from inside the walls, like fingernails trying to break through. The family tried recording the phenomena, but the cameras captured nothing. Shadows flickered, just at the edge of vision, vanishing when confronted directly. The house was playing with perception, warping reality without physically harming anyone. Yet, then came the whispers. Not always through the phone, but through the walls themselves, faint and almost conversational, sometimes urgent, sometimes plaintive. The family could feel breath on their necks, the warmth of something unseen pressing in, just beyond reach. They tried to rationalize drafts, plumbing, faulty electricity, but each explanation fell apart under scrutiny. Even the neighbors began to notice oddities, lights turning on and off with no one home, the faint ringing of a phone that belonged to someone else entirely. It was as if the house had developed a mind, a will, communicating in its own cryptic language. One night, the father woke to a chilling sight. A shadow had detached itself from the corner of the living room, stretching unnaturally along the floor, moving toward the phone as it rang. The static hissed, forming almost intelligible words. "Help! Help!" He froze, heart hammering, unable to move until the shape recoiled and dissolved into the dark corners of the room. Sleep became impossible, the house demanding attention at all hours, insisting that its story be acknowledged. Fear had become a constant companion, and every member of the household sensed it. The house was not merely haunted, it was aware. If the house could speak, what would it tell us? Desperation led the family to call in experts, police officers, electricians, and even a few local paranormal enthusiasts arrived, each eager to find a rational explanation. Every wire was tested, circuits inspected, Phones disconnected and reconnected, yet the calls persisted. Investigators documented anomalies. The phone ringing at impossible times, objects moving against gravity, shadows darting across walls with no logical source. Some shrugged it off, citing stress or imagination, but even skeptics admitted the house seemed conscious. A team of paranormal investigators set up cameras, EMF detectors and motion sensors. For hours, nothing happened. And then, at the precise time the house had claimed as its own, 2:17 a.m., the monitors flickered violently. Lights blinked, shadows stretched, and the phone rang once more. One investigator swore he heard words, "Leave, before it's too late." Cameras recorded faint disturbances in the walls, like a heartbeat echoing through plaster, but the source remained invisible. The more they tried to observe it objectively, the more elusive it became. The family's panic grew as each visit ended with more questions than answers. Attempts to move the house's line of communication, disconnecting phones, removing cords, only intensified its activity. The house seemed to resist control, asserting itself, forcing recognition. Even mundane acts like flipping a switch or closing a door provoked subtle retaliation. A scraping sound, a shadow moving across the ceiling, a low hum vibrating through the floorboards. It was a message, but the meaning was encrypted in fear. And still, some nights brought calm, almost lulling the family into false security. But it was temporary. The house had rhythms, moods, and intentions. To understand it required more than logic. It demanded listening, paying attention to the spaces between silence, to the static-filled breaths of the walls themselves. Every investigation left the same impression. This house was alive in a way that science could not contain, and those who entered it were now participants in its story. It wanted something, and it wasn't going to wait any longer. The climax came on a night heavy with storm clouds, rain thrumming against the windows like a percussion of warning. The family was gathered, terrified, every light in the house on, every door locked. The phone rang relentlessly, each tone sharper, more insistent. Then the shadows began moving with purpose, stretching and twisting across walls and floors. The family froze as the whispers grew louder, clearer. "You have to leave, or it will claim you." A figure seemed to coalesce in the hallway, a dark humanoid shape that didn't belong to any member of the household. It shifted, elongated, moving in impossible ways, and the very air felt heavy, resisting the family's movements. Objects flew across rooms as if pushed by invisible hands. Cupboards slammed, lights exploded, and the phone continued its ceaseless ringing. The house itself had become a predator. The father tried to grab the phone, desperate to silence it, but it jumped from his grasp, vibrating violently. The whispers merged into a roar, a chorus of demands and warnings that filled the walls, shaking the foundation of the home. The family ran, hearts pounding, as doors slammed behind them, shadows reaching for them, and the very walls seemed to pulse with life. Every step they took was met with resistance, the house asserting its will with terrifying force. For a brief, frozen moment, the family realized that the house was not just a backdrop for fear, it was the fear itself, and their survival depended on understanding it. Some stories end, but some houses never let go. By dawn, the storm had passed. The family, shaken and exhausted, fled the house, leaving behind belongings, memories, and the lingering sense of being watched. Authorities deemed the events inexplicable, chalked up to coincidences or exaggeration, but neighbors whispered about the house, about the calls, about the shadows that still flickered in its windows. Paranormal investigators left notes, recordings, and charts, but nothing could truly capture what had transpired. Years later, the house remains on the quiet Ohio street, vacant yet restless. Locals say the lights still flicker at odd hours, the faint hum of a phone echoes inside, and anyone who dares enter feels the walls press in, as if listening, judging, warning. The family rebuilt their lives elsewhere, but the memory never faded. The house had imprinted itself on them, an entity they could never fully escape. Some mysteries are unsolvable, some warnings unheeded, and some houses are never just houses. They are something more, something alive, waiting for the next resident to answer the call. The house stood in silence now, but the silence was heavy, almost watchful, as if it had paused only to observe what would come next. The story didn't end with the family fleeing. In a way, it never ends. Every corner, every shadow, every crack in the plaster seemed to hum with memory, whispering tales of what had happened inside. Even now, years later, neighbors swear they hear faint ringing at night, soft static that drifts through the empty rooms, and sometimes, just sometimes, a whisper that sounds almost human. Help. It's tempting to think of houses as lifeless, as mere walls and wood, but some hold more than memories. They hold presence, intention, and even anger. This one in Ohio is proof. It had chosen its victims, communicated in ways no one could rationalize, and left a mark on those who dared live inside it. You might dismiss it as coincidence or overactive imagination, but if you listen closely, you might hear it too. The low murmur of a home trying to be heard, trying to warn, trying to reach out from the darkness. The lesson isn't just about fear, it's about awareness. Some places remember, some places react, and some, like this house, have a voice of their own. If you ever come across a house that feels wrong, that seems to call out when no one is home, don't ignore it. Because some walls aren't just walls. They are keepers of secrets, and some secrets are desperate to escape. And as the sun sets and shadows grow long, remember, houses may seem still, but sometimes the stillness is the most dangerous part. The next time you hear a ringing phone in an empty room, or a whisper in a dark corner, pause and listen. The house might be speaking to you, because some houses never truly let go.